So I've got the skid plate out. Drive shafts are disconnected. And here you can see all my transfer case and my transmission supported by a jack. I've removed the starter, unplugged all the connectors, removed the slave cylinder and the transfer case linkage. And here I've pulled out the center console and that boot that attaches to the tub here so I could access it. That actually made it kind of nice to get to the transfer case four-wheel drive indicator switch and the vent hose and then the reverse switch. Anyway, here's the connector for it. Oh, it's on that side. There it is. Right there. There's a little Mercedes logo. Just another reason I don't like the NSG370. You can see here this shifter boot's pretty leaky, but that seal is not replaceable independently. It's part of the shift tower, and if you want to buy the shift tower, it's of course discontinued by Mopar. If you can find it, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $500, and if you want a replacement, you can buy one from B&M that supposedly is an improvement, but that one's about $600. So all for a little oil seal that should cost 15 bucks, if even that. My 80-pound skid plate is there. This is another one of those ridiculous 05 and 06 TJ parts. So this is the boot that attaches to the inside of the tub. And as you can tell, it's just shredded. That I don't know if it's discontinued or not, but it's ridiculously expensive. They're like 140 bucks for this stupid thing. So what I'm probably going to do is cut this rubber out and use the hard plastic and then adapt a different boot onto it. Probably one from an AX15 TJ, which I have right here. So, I don't know. Something like that. However it best lines up. So it's ready for me to lower the transmission out of the Jeep once I get the transmission jack under it, and I've cracked those loose on both sides. I haven't gotten the E12s on top yet because I'm going to get my transmission jack under here and lower it a little bit so I can get to them. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and address my mounting situation. Here I've got my AX15 laying upside down. You can see where the mount bolts up. This is the mount bracket, and it hits those two bolts just barely before the other holes line up. So I've marked it here a little bit with a scribe where I'm going to grind some clearances out so that'll go all the way on. Okay, let's test fit it. Hey, it works. My grinds aren't real pretty. I'll clean them up a little bit before I paint it. That one just barely is enough. I might take a little bit out of there too. That one's good. Okay, so the transmission is out. There's my flywheel. I've already given a little bit of sanding. I haven't taken the pilot bearing out yet. There's my transfer case. I left it on the transmission to pull it out, but I think I'm going to wait to put it back on until I get the new transmission in. Here's the two transmissions side by side for comparison. So you can see the new AX15 has a detachable bell housing. I've got it strapped onto my transmission jack, and then the NSG370 is just parked on top of the packaging that the AX15 came in. Inside, other than just being dirty, they're not a whole lot different. Same clutch linkage and everything. The splines are the same, obviously. One difference here is the NSG has a seal that actually meets the output shaft, so it has its own seal, whereas the AX15 has some space there for the transfer case input gear to go into, and so the seal actually rides on the transfer case's input gear. If you've looked into swapping transfer cases onto different transmissions, as that input shaft is That input gear is several different lengths. That one happens to be a long one, which came off of a AX15 originally, because that's the transfer case that was in my 99 TJ. And I switched it over because it already had a slip yoke eliminator on it. It'll kind of be going home. The NSG from the factory came with a short input gear, but the long input gear seemed to fit, so that's what I used. Although my output shaft seal seems to be a little bit weepy. Something else I noticed, my transfer case is leaking a little bit around the speedometer sensor. It's just some oil residue and dust around there that's following its way down the side of the transfer case, and there's actually a little drop on the bottom. Some people might have heard about the bread trick to remove a pilot bearing. I tried anyway. The idea is that you shove some bread in there and hammer it, and the bread kind of turns into a hydraulic fluid and pushes the pilot bearing back out. But I hammered on it for quite a bit and it didn't really want to move. So I think I'm going to have to hitch a ride to the parts store and actually get a pilot bearing puller. That looks kind of oily up there. So I'm kind of thinking maybe what I thought was a rear main seal leak all this time might actually be something like a valve cover, because there's even some oil up here on top of the bell housing. So that might be coming from up top, and maybe all I need is a valve cover gasket, which would be nice because I don't really want to do a rear main seal on this. I've actually got a valve cover gasket in the toolbox. So if you remember in my prep video where I mounted the bell housing, that was an opening for the early crankshaft position sensor. And since I don't have an early crankshaft position sensor, that hole needed to be covered. So I took a scrap piece of Colorado license plate that I had on the Jeep before I moved. It was my front one that was all bent up anyway, so I cut it out with some tin snips and screwed it on there, so it covers the hole nicely. So the transmission's in, the skid plate's next, and I just wanted to go over what I had to do a little bit differently here. So this is the mount where I had to clearance it, just around those two bolts. Some of these bolts are different, like this is actually threaded, whereas on the NSG370 it was like a self-threading screw, so this one's just a standard hex bolt. Same thing with this starter bolt here. This starter bolt was standard, where the old one was metric. So there's one of these, and then there's one above the starter up there, and then one on the other side, so there's a total of 3. And then here, the crankshaft sensor needed a new bolt. It's actually oriented a little bit differently than it was on the other one. On the NSG, the plug points forward, and I actually cracked it when I was removing the transmission because it caught this heat shield. So I ordered a new one, and it'll be here Wednesday for me to replace that. And now I'm going to put the skid plate on. I'm going to have to do something with this shifter. I mean, I knew I was going to have to bend it to get it out of the radio, but it's literally steering wheel level. That's just that's just obnoxious. So I guess I wanted to change the knob anyway, and the threads are weird, so I guess what I'm going to do, I'll probably cut it off maybe right here, or right here, I think right there, and then I'll weld a bolt on top of it so I can put something close to the factory shift knob on it. So here's this Mercedes connector for the reverse light switch that I'm going to cut off and replace with a matching GM weather pack that on the reverse switch that's on the AX15. I've never used one of these, so I want to kind of pay attention to how long I need to strip it. Wow, that looks pretty factory. Look at that. Not bad for the first try. I think that's all done. I'll just tape it up to attach it to the loom here and plug it in. So here's what I did with that comically long shifter. I cut it off to about match where it was with the NSG370. I bent it to approximately match, and then I welded on this countersunk M10 by 1.5 bolt to the end of it, and then ground it off. So my factory shift knob will attach to that, and now I'm ready to put on the boot. Here's the boot that I ended up with. So this is an AX15 shift boot off a 99 Wrangler. This is the original plate that went with the NSG370 in my Jeep. This post mounts to the center console, and my understanding is that this may have moved between years, so that's why, so you can't really match an old plate with a new console. So if you switch that, then you have to switch the whole console. So the AX15 shifter is a little bit farther back than the NSG370 one, so it left a gap which I filled with an old license plate. I riveted it all together and sealed it up with seam sealer so it shouldn't be letting any hot air up into my tub. So I find this kind of curious. The advanced adapter's bell housing rotates the crank position sensor to a different orientation. On the NSG370, the hole is up here, so the connector points this way, and the plug just goes right there. But this one, it's pointed up, and it's really close to the inside of the tub right here. I don't really like that, but I don't really have anything that I can really do about it. I guess maybe I could loosen up my transmission skid bolts here and try to push the skid that way. And maybe I could do the same thing with my motor mounts. Just loosen those bolts right there and scoot the whole drivetrain a little bit to the left. Here is the finished product. I didn't paint the shifter, I just left it bare metal. You can see all the marks from where I bent it. I might go back and paint it someday, but for now I think that's fine. The knob ended up, I think, right around the same height it was as the NSG370. It's a little bit farther back. My throttle will actually go all the way forward and just barely touches instead of pushing buttons, but I usually keep it about like that anyway because I put some slack in the cable. But that's first gear right there. So you can kind of see how far back it is. And then if I take it back, that's second. Yeah, there's second. I don't have an insert for it yet because it's obviously wrong. The one I had was. So I'm thinking about, I don't know if I'll just get a 5-speed insert from an AX15 Jeep. I've also thought about, just being that it's a Toyota manufactured transmission, I thought about maybe grabbing a shift knob out of a Toyota pickup from the 80s. They have a different thread pattern, but they make inserts that'll take me from M12 to M10, which is what this is. So the clutch is silent, which is nice. The last one was really squeaky, so I'm happy about that. Let's start it up. Sounds good. Reverse. so much tighter, so much more positive. Man, this is totally, it feels like my 99, like my Sahara. I swear it's a shorter throw too. Feels like I'm moving maybe 60% as far from first to second. It feels tight too, like there's no slack. The 6-speed had a ton of gear lash, it felt like I'd let out the clutch or just on and off the throttle, and I could feel the lash being taken up in the transmission as I did it. So first gear. You know, I'm not sure I can tell that big of a difference in the first gear. You know, this one's 383, and the 6-speed is a 446 first. This doesn't feel that much different. I may notice a rock curling, I guess, I don't know. But so far, so good. Oh yeah. There's fourth. I like it. I'm happy. Happy, happy, happy.